and welcome to the Plant School podcast. I'm Rachel Tenney, and here we learn all about plants, how they work, how to care for them, and it's all taught in a way that anyone from beginner to expert can listen to, understand, and enjoy. So I hope that you will join me in Plant School. Hello and welcome to the Plant School podcast. Today we're going to be talking all about Hoyas. And before we get into Hoyas, I want to go over our 2 giveaway winners that I do every episode. So for those of you who don't know, just really quickly, I pick 2 giveaway winners, one who has left a review on Apple Podcasts, and the other winner comes from someone who has left a comment on Spotify. So whether you are listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, since those are the 2 main platforms that I know you tune into, you have a chance to win a giveaway on the Plant School podcast. And what you win is a package from Market Botany. They send you a bottle of their prop drops and leaf shine. You can check them out at marketbotany.com, and you can even use code PlantSchoolPodcast for a 10% off discount. All right, so getting into our giveaway winners for today, starting with Apple Podcasts, our winner is Krista Renee. She said, "I'm glad I found your podcast. I have a whole plant room and have had gardens since I was little. I also have a plant board game called Photosynthesis." That's so fun. I can see that she left this review right after I did the Planty board game podcast. It makes me so happy that I'm not the only one that have Planty board games. So Krista, if that was you that left that review, go ahead and email me at tennyplants@gmail.com, TENNEY plants@gmail.com. I'll get your address and we'll get that giveaway package sent your way. And then moving over to our Spotify winner, last episode, I asked you guys to comment anything you want, of course, but also I asked what your Christmas plans were. And our winner today is, I apologize if I say this wrong, but it's Versani Orsi, and she said, "For years, our Christmas tree has been a Norfolk Island pine. We decorate it once a year. It's a simpler solution, but it's lovely to watch it grow bigger each year." I love that solution. And what a beautiful tradition to have that Norfolk Island pine be your Christmas tree every year. I actually have one, but it is so small. It would be the saddest little Christmas tree for many years. Perhaps when I get it a little bigger, we could switch it out for the real live Christmas trees that we've been using. Anyways, that's besides the point. For Sanyi, if that was you, go ahead and email me at tennyplants@gmail.com. And for all of you listening on Spotify and you are interested in entering the giveaway, go ahead and scroll down on this episode to the comments and leave a comment. It can be anything, but I am going to verbally ask a question if you'd like to answer it. And what I want to know is, do you own a Hoya? And if so, what kind of Hoya? Again, if you don't own one or you just want to comment some emojis or whatever, just you commenting will enter you in, and I will not disqualify you based on what you choose to comment. And thank you, Market Botany, for sponsoring our giveaway winners. All right, let's dive into this episode about Hoyas. I learned so much in this episode. This is one that I had done a long time ago at the beginning of this podcast. And if you guys have been around, you may have seen that the first 50 episodes of this podcast, they've been archived. They're no longer around. And this was one of them. My podcast has just changed so much. That's why I got rid of them, if you're wondering. But this was one of them. So I was so excited to pull it out and to research it all over again, because my research was very minimal when I first started this podcast. It's gone a little crazy now, but I think it's for the best. And I quickly want to give a shout out to Melissa, because she was actually the one who inspired this episode. She has a Hoya carrii, and she asked if I could do an episode about them specifically. And I realized I didn't even have an episode on Hoyas in general. So as I go through this episode, there are so many Hoyas, right? But I am going to be focusing on Hoya carnosas, but also Hoya carrii, because I do want to address any questions that Melissa may have had. And if you ever have a suggestion for the Plant School podcast, you can always message me. All my contact info is in the show notes of every episode. You can find me at Plant School Podcast on Instagram. A lot of you will reach out to me there with episode ideas, and I love that. I do write them all down. Although it takes me a while to get to all of them, I promise I am writing them down. All right, for real, let's get into this. So I like to start with the question of, what is a Hoya. Hoyas are from the Apocynaceae family. It's commonly called the dogbane family, and the name dogbane, it comes from the fact that a lot of plants in this taxa were used as dog poison. But don't be alarmed because Hoyas are actually not toxic to cats or dogs. They may get very mildly sick if they ingest a lot of your Hoya, but in general, they are safe for your cats and dogs. A Hoya subfamily is the Asclepiadaceae family, which is the milkweed family. And a common tie in this subfamily is that they have that white sap. And Hoyas are no different. They have that milky white sap. Common names for the Hoya, there's so many of them because Hoyas include a large number of plants. But some of the common names are pentagram plant, Hindu rope, wax plant, or wax vine. And those names, wax plant and wax vine, probably the most common that you'll hear, but they are due to their leaves, which are quite waxy looking. The Hoya carrii is commonly called Hoya hearts or lucky heart. Oftentimes you will see them as a single leaf cutting stuck in a pot, and that single leaf is a heart shape, hence its common name. Hoyas are evergreen, perennial creepers or vines, although not all of them are vines, because it is a genus of over 500 species. And like I mentioned, Hoya carnosa is arguably the most common houseplant in the Hoya genus, although there are many others that people keep as houseplants. A lot of people like it because its foliage is attractive and has strongly scented flowers, whereas something like the Hoya carrii, it only has a very faint smell with its flowers. There was even a Hoya called, I'm forgetting it off the top of my head, I didn't write it down, but it was like Hoya odorii, something like that. It had odor in its species name, and it was known for being one of the strongest smelling Hoyas. I'm pretty sure it can be kept as a houseplant, so if you're looking for something that has a very strong smell, and it's a good smell, it's not bad, you should look into that Hoya. Also, many Hoya species are great for terrarium, so if you are in the terrarium world, there are many Hoyas that do the job. Hoyas are often epiphytic, so they grow on other plants, usually on trees, and they are also lithophytic, meaning they grow in very rocky areas or even in the rocks. They rarely grow on roots in the ground. Most of them are growing on top of another plant or in a very rocky area. And like I mentioned, they do flower. The flower color of Hoyas come in a large variety from cream to blush pink or even burgundy and red. And the flower structure are these umbels. So it's kind of like a little bunch of little flowers. They're very cute, and I feel like that's why a lot of Hoya collectors really love them, are because of their fun flowers that they have. I mentioned that the Hoya carrii, you often find it as just a leaf cutting in a little pot. And I do want to mention at the beginning of this episode that that's kind of a novelty plant. If you buy one, do not expect it to grow into a mature plant. It's just going to stay as a leaf cutting forever, which if you're into that, that's great, but don't expect anything exciting to happen. In order to get your Hoya carrii to sprout a vine, you need part of the stem and a node from that mother plant. And if you do have that stem and node, it can take several years to get any new growth. Hoyas are kind of on the slow growing side in general. So just keep that in mind when you see them at Valentine's Day, because those Hoya carrii will show up. Because again, they look like a little heart stuck in soil. Just keep in mind that that leaf cutting is not going to produce any further growth. All right, moving on. Let's talk about what they symbolize. I love this question. If any of you are interested in where I pull these from, I'm not just pulling them from my butt, I promise. It's from a book, one of my favorites because I use it so often. It's called The Complete Language of Flowers, and it is by S. Teresa Dietz. It's a lovely book. It's beautiful and also just very informative. If you ever want to be super cutesy, you can pick flowers, or you can even look up the meaning and go find a flower based on the meaning and give it to someone special, your spouse, your significant other, a friend. And it's just kind of a fun way to send a message to someone, hopefully a nice message. But obviously there are meanings to flowers that are more on the aggressive side. I don't know what kind of messages you're trying to send, but this book is a great one. Language of Flowers. Anyways, so this is what the language of flowers says for Hoyas. And it had Hoyas just like in general, and then it also had a little excerpt for Hoya carnosa in particular. So Hoyas in general, they symbolize contentment and susceptibility. It also listed the possible powers of the Hoya, and it included the power of power, and it also has the power of protection. There's also folklore surrounding it that if it is grown in your house will be protected. And if you dry its flowers, you can actually wear it in an amulet to provide you both power and protection. And then Hoya carnosa, it holds the symbolic meaning to climb to the stars, or it can mean I'm looking through you, or also protection and wealth. I'm not sure why you'd want to send someone the message that you're looking through them. I feel like that's kind of rude. Like they don't mean anything. I don't know. But let's move on and talk about where Hoyas originate. So most of them are tropical succulents, and they are all native to areas such as tropical Asia, the Pacific Islands, and Australia. That's where a majority of them are coming from. And with that question, I always love to go into a plant's history. By far, this is my favorite thing to dive into with these episodes, just learning about these plants, where they came from, how they got into our homes. So I mentioned where they came from, and various cultures that Hoyas are native to, they used Hoyas medicinally. This included cultures such as Indonesian tribes, Southeast Asia, and especially Polynesian cultures. The first recorded specimens of Hoya were collected in the Philippines in 1791, and then the genus was first formally described in 1810, so not too many years later, by botanist Robert Brown. He first found Hoyas during his expedition to Western Australia, and he described it in his book, and the book title is in Latin, so we're going to give this a whack, but it may not be right, but it's Prodromus Florae Novae, Hollandae et Insulae Van Diemen. Is a really long title, but in that book he put in the first species of Hoya as Hoya carnosa. He named this plant in honor of his friend Thomas Hoy, who was the gardener for the Duke of Northumberland. And there's actually a little bit of controversy over this name. So number one, we have it named as the Hoya. But also there was someone else, and he named it Sperlingia val. Some people say that the Hoya publication was first before Sperlingia, just by several days, and others argue that it was the opposite. So it's widely debated, but obviously most people just use the name Hoya. It's the most widely known name, and it's very hard to change a plant's name. If Val's manuscript had been published when it was first submitted, there's no doubt that Hoyas would be known as Sperlingias today, which honestly, I'm sorry, but it's not as catchy. Sperlingia did lose out. We know them as Hoyas, and it's really interesting because the reasoning is because Val, he was actually hanged for treason. And so his manuscript was not published, even if it might have been received before Brown's naming it the Hoya. And so it's debated because perhaps publishers didn't want to have his name associated with that of a traitor because he was hanged for treason. So today we have the name Hoya. And Hoya carnosa is considered to be the classic Hoya. It was extremely popular in the 1970s. That's a little fact for you. Obviously, they are extremely popular today as well. And I also wanted to include some facts about the Hoya caryi. It was first formally collected by Arthur Francis George Kerr in 1920 in the Doi Suthep Mountains in northern Thailand. This was 110 years after the Hoya carnosa was first described in 1810. But anyways, the Hoya caryi, it was transplanted back to Kew Gardens, and it flowered there, and then it was then described and classified by William Grant Crabe. And obviously he honored the man who collected it, Arthur Francis George Kerr, and named it the Hoya caryi. Or Currii, since his last name is Kerr. That just occurred to me. And that sounded like a pun, because Kerr is in the word occurred. But that was not intentional. So I think it's Hoya caryi. My apologies. Now you know that I absolutely do not know everything, which hopefully is not a shock to you. All right, so let's move on. There are a lot of interesting studies with Hoyas. There is a 2009 study by University of Georgia that shows that the Hoya carnosa does remove VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds, and other airborne contaminants from the air. This is a claim made for a lot of houseplants. And so I made sure to look into the nitty-gritty details of the study and other studies that were saying the same things, and all of them said that further research is needed for their effectiveness in interior environments, such as offices and our homes. So yes, they do remove airborne contaminants from the air, but in our homes where doors are opening, windows can be opened, air is circulating around through air conditioning and heating units. That effect of a plant removing those contaminants is so small because our air is changing so much. In a sealed chamber of air, yeah, it's making a big difference, but that is not what our homes are. So I just want to put that in there so that you aren't thinking that your houseplants are making a huge difference, because a lot of research is still needed, and early research is showing that they don't do a whole lot in our normal home environments. If you happen to live in an enclosed chamber, get all those houseplants in there because they can help you clean the air. But I did look into other studies, and specifically medicinal studies. Can Hoyas be used for medicine? And there's a lot of really intriguing research. Hoyas do have a lot of properties. And of course, a lot of these properties have not been used on humans yet, besides them being used in ancient cultures. But research is showing that they have anti-cancer properties, antibacterial, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory, anti-diabetic, and also anti-nociceptive, which is inhibiting the detection of pain, and also parasympatholytic, that's a long word, parasympatholytic effects, meaning that it reduces the activity of your parasympathetic nervous system, which is kind of your like resting and digesting nervous system. So a lot of really promising effects that they hold, but obviously a lot of research needs to be done before it can be used in any effective way for humans on a large scale. And while I was looking into that, I actually came across a patent for the Hoya carnosa. It was made by Avon Products, which I'm assuming is the Avon company that our grandmas all used, right? Where they sold lotions and perfumes and all that kind of stuff. But anyways, this patent was made in 2013, and it was for using extracts of Hoya carnosa, particularly, to impart anti-aging benefits to skin. I skimmed through the whole patent. I've never read a patent before, but they are very long and very in-depth, but it talked about how the Hoya carnosa, if you use it in very small amounts, it was seen to have a promising effect for fine wrinkles, for sagging skin, and it could help promote the production of collagen. So everything you'd really want in an anti-aging cream or oil or whatever they were going to use it for. And I'm not sure if they have like products out there currently that use the Hoya carnosa, but it was just really interesting to come across that patent for it. It obviously holds a lot of promise in the anti-aging effects. Whether you should get your Hoya and smish it up and apply it to your face, I don't know about that. They were using very small amounts, and I don't want to be responsible for something happening to your beautiful face. But just know that Avon is onto something there. And lastly, in its history, I do want to mention that today it is obviously a well-loved houseplant, all Hoyas. And they are really popular with collectors because the Hoya genus has so much variation in their leaf shape, in their colors, in their blooms. So if you are more of a collector of houseplants, Hoyas are a really fun genus to dive into. And with that, let's move on to the care portion of these care guides where we're actually learning how to take care of this plant. If you have one, if you're thinking of getting one, want to see how much maintenance it takes, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know, starting with how to water it. So because there are so many types of Hoyas, they can kind of differ in their watering needs. Some have thinner leaves and they may need more water more often compared to those Hoyas with thicker leaves, such as your Hoya carrii. They have those big, thick, heart-shaped leaves. But in general, you want to water your Hoya when the soil is dry. It doesn't handle overwatering very well since most of them have those thick, fleshy leaves. And if you do overwater, you will notice with its leaves starting to drop, the leaves can actually become blackened, or dropping flower buds can be a sign of a watering issue, whether underwatering or overwatering. Those flower buds will let you know. Hoyas do great with humidity since they are native to tropical regions. So if you have like a well-lit bathroom, they will do really well in there. And as I read about them, a lot of people recommended to keep their soil slightly drier in the winter because this will encourage spring blooming. A lot of experienced Hoya collectors actually wait until the Hoya leaves are slightly puckered before they water. I am not an experienced Hoya collector, but I will take their word for it. Moving on to their lighting needs, they do prefer bright indirect sunlight. A lot of direct sun can scorch their leaves, but you just want them in a well-lit area with indirect light. They don't do too great in low light. They won't flower if they aren't getting enough light, which is one of their main draws, so you definitely want to put them in a well-lit area. Also, they love a temperature range between like 64 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 18 to 24 degrees Celsius. And try and keep them above 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius in the winter. Although I did come across a few people on Reddit saying that they have let their Hoyas go well below that and they have been just fine. But to be on the safe side, that's kind of the general range you want to keep them in. They can drop their leaves or the leaves can become blackened if they are getting too cold. Also, they can be a little finicky when you move them. They're kind of like ficuses in that way where you move a ficus plant and it will drop leaves. Well, if you move your Hoya plant a lot, it can drop leaves as well, and it can also drop its flower buds. So once you've found a spot that it's happy with, try not to fuss with it too much and just keep it in that area. Moving on to fertilizing, you want to fertilize during their seasons of growth, whether that is in the winter for you or in the summer or spring. And when you're looking at what fertilizer is ideal for it, you want to do something that has a higher phosphorus. Phosphorus is known for helping a houseplant bloom and aiding in that. So when you're looking at one, you want that middle number of your fertilizer to be higher because all fertilizers will have three numbers, the NPK values, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So if you get something like a 10-20-10 or a 5-10-3, those are great for Hoyas because that higher phosphorus will help those blooms come in and come in often. Moving on to how to repot one and what kind of soil it prefers. They do like a well-draining soil, so consider using like a succulent mix for your soil. I've also heard of people growing their Hoyas in coconut coir and leca, and also in pine bark. And this is because they are all fast draining, and with Hoyas being epiphytic and also lithophytic, where they like to grow on top of other plants, on top of rocks, hardly in a normal soil substrate, it makes sense why they like something that's really well draining. And with repotting, honestly, they don't need to be repotted very often. They do really well when they are pot bound. So be on the slow side when it comes to repotting. When roots start coming out of the pot, that is a sign that perhaps it's time, and just move it to a pot that is 1 to 2 inches bigger in circumference to the pot that it's currently in. Moving on to how to prune a Hoya. They don't generally require pruning, but you can remove dead growth if you want to. You can also prune to kind of control their size or to encourage bushier growth. So if it's getting super leggy, there's not very many leaves on its vine, and no flowers are coming, you can cut that back and it will kind of help reinvigorate the plant. And it's probably a sign that you need to put the plant in better lighting too, if you're getting that really long, leggy growth. And also I want to mention that those stalks that have flowers, they can reflower for many years, so do not cut off those flowering stalks. Let the flowers fall off naturally and keep them there because the flowers can come back. All right, I have a few more things to talk about with their care, starting with how to propagate them. They're actually really easy to propagate, which we love. So it's best done during active growing seasons, and they do well as leaf cuttings. We mentioned the Hoya carrii is often sold as a leaf cutting, though not much will happen with it unless you have a piece of the stem and node with that leaf cutting. More commonly, though, you will see them propagated as stem cuttings. So if you have a Hoya and you want to propagate it, you'll get a cutting about 4 to 5 inches long. They do great if you apply a little bit of bottom heat, if you have like a heating pad that you can turn on. Or sometimes I've seen people honestly put their cuttings on top of a drying machine, and the heat from the dryer can help kick off growth for a cutting. Using a rooting hormone is recommended to help your chances of success, and you can set your cuttings in a glass of water, or you can put them straight into soil. If you do choose the water route, get the roots about 2 inches long or so, and then you can transfer it to a well-draining soil or whatever growing medium that you prefer. And if you do propagate, just know that they are slow growers. You do need to show a little bit of patience with them. So give them their time, be slow to repot them, and let them grow at their own pace. It might take a year or two before it is finally able to bloom and flower. All right, let's talk about pests. They are prone to mealybugs, whiteflies, scale, and aphids. Aphids are more a problem if you keep it outside long term, but mealybugs, whiteflies, and scale can often become problems indoors. So when you buy a Hoya, just make sure that it doesn't have any pests. If it does, treat them before you bring it into your home. If it does get out of hand, using an insecticide is honestly the way to go, but if it's a small infestation, using rubbing alcohol on a Q-tip to manually remove them is great, or you can use something like neem oil to get rid of those pests. And I just want to throw in some extra care tips for your Hoyas that I haven't gone over. Hoyas are great for trellises or for poles. They are a climbing plant, and so you can have all sorts of fun trellises to have them climb on. Also, it's good to note that when your Hoya is flowering or it's in bud, you don't want to be misting it, moving it, or repotting it. Basically any sort of large stress on this plant because it can cause the Hoya to lose its flowers. And also, some Hoyas will produce nectar with its flowers, and the nectar might drip. This is to attract pollinators, moths, flies, ants. It's very normal, but just be aware of that so, one, you know what's going on, and also you can clean up that mess without too many questions in your mind of where that mess came from. Okay, and last question I like to cover with their care, and it's kind of just a fun one, is how long can this plant live? So a Hoya, with proper care, which hopefully you have in your belt after this episode, they can live for decades, even up to like 30 years indoors, and probably longer, because I did come across a Reddit post where the user was showing their Hoya. It had been given to them by their great-grandmother, and it was currently 103 years old. So they can last for a long time with the proper care. I think that Reddit post was a Hoya carnosa, and the picture of it was beautiful. It had so many flowers blooming, and I'm sure that that can be you too, especially with this whole episode diving deep into what a Hoya is and how to care for one. But with that, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it helps all you people out there who love your Hoyas. And I hope that you will be back here in 2 weeks for a brand new episode of the Plant School Podcast. Thank you so much for being here and for listening to the Plant School Podcast. I hope that you will join me for our next episode. And if you would like to support this podcast and keep it going, there's a link down in the show notes of this episode where you can donate to this podcast. And I really appreciate all that help. or you can go to my merch store, which is also linked in the notes of this episode, and you can find some really cool plant-related shirts and stickers. And if you want to support the podcast but spend no money, feel free to share it with a friend, leave a review. All these things greatly help me out and allow me to keep doing this. Again, thank you so much for listening and for being here at the Plant School Podcast.